Today we're going to talk about the final chapters of Exodus. I'm going to do two of the readings in one, so Genesis 46 through 50. And there's quite a bit in here that we could discuss. First of all, the fact that now finally Joseph and Jacob are reunited, and is a beautiful reunion where Joseph, pulls his arms around Jacob's neck and they weep together. I mean, very similar to the reunion that Jacob and Esau had earlier in Jacob's life, that God is bringing all things back for their good. And it's pretty neat then. Jacob is able to go to Egypt and he stands before this great leader, Pharaoh, and he describes himself as a man who's carried on his pilgrimage, and it's been a difficult one of sorrow, which is kind of interesting when you think about the story of Jacob, that Jacob has really gotten everything that he wanted. I mean, if he would have talked about all the things that he would have desired, he would have wanted the birthright, the blessing from his father. He would have wanted Rachel, and he would have wanted wealth and a big family and all these blessings, and see Joseph again. And he got all those things, but it's all come through the cross of toil, of suffering, and he's had to learn to wrestle with God and lean on God for all of these things in his life, and I think the same is true in our lives. Then is kind of another thing that's pretty beautiful is we hear that Jacob has 17 more years with Joseph in Egypt. And so Jacob was with Joseph for the first 17 years of his life, and then Joseph was sold into slavery, and then we hear that he was with him the last 17 years of his life. So this beautiful symmetry there, and God's blessing to kind of almost have them rediscover this whole childhood, the years that were lost. Then we have the blessing of Manasseh and Ephraim in chapters 48, and that's pretty fascinating also. Jacob asks that Joseph brings his two sons that were born in Egypt, and he says, they're mine, I'm going to adopt them. Pretty strong language, but he's saying that these sons that were born to Rachel's son Joseph, they're actually part of my family. And they're actually, when it comes to the blessing of Jacob, they're actually going to take the place of the firstborn. And so Reuben would have gotten the blessing of the firstborn, but because Reuben slept with his father's wife, he kind of forfeited that blessing. And then Simeon and Levi were the next in line in the family to get the blessing from their father. But they forfeited that by the massacre they carried out at Shechem to kind of get revenge on the raping of their sister. And so now he's going to bless Ephraim and Manasseh. But this is kind of interesting. He brings them to him and has kind of this formal blessing. But when he's about to hold out his hands, he switches his hands and blesses Ephraim, the secondborn, instead of Manasseh, and gives the firstborn blessing to the secondborn. And again, this is all kind of reenacting the things that we heard when Jacob went to his elderly, blinding father Isaac and got the blessing. But Jacob knows what he's doing. He says, no, I know what I'm doing. This is how God works. God doesn't work the way the rest of the nations work, the way culture works. God blesses on grace. And so he gives this blessing to Ephraim. And kind of interesting now, as you think more into the Old Testament, when the tribes of Israel are separated and you have Judah in the south, when you talk about the tribes in the north, lots of times they're just talked about, that's Ephraim. Ephraim almost takes up the whole northern tribes of Israel because of this blessing that he would receive. And this would be in the future the region of Galilee that Ephraim would inherit. And then chapter 49 is more blessings. Jacob's about to die, and so he brings all the brothers together, all the sons together. And probably the most important, he speaks almost words of curses on the firstborn Reuben and on Simeon and Levi for how they acted. But then when you get to Judah, Judah gets the real blessing of all blessings. He's going to carry the line of the Savior, the Messiah, um, just like it wasn't through Ishmael, but through Isaac carried the line of the Savior. Abraham passed that on to Isaac, and Isaac passed on the line of the Savior, that blessing, not on Esau, but on Jacob or Israel. And now Israel is going to pass on the line of the Savior, not to Reuben or Simeon or Levi or any of those others, but on now to Judah. And we hear now another interesting prophecy that this Messiah that's going to come from the line of Judah is also going to be a king. And so this is prophesying the king line. He's going to have a scepter like a king, the scepter of David. And then finally, ultimately, Jesus is going to bring this prosperity into the world. There's going to be so much wine, you're going to be able to wash your clothes in wine, he says. And so there's some really interesting things in chapter 40. And then the Bible, or book of Genesis, ends where Jacob is dead, and now the brothers wonder, like, has Joseph still been maybe lying to us and holding out and biding his time, waiting to destroy us? And Joseph says no. He says he weeps when they think that he's about to destroy them now that their father is gone. He says, no, I'm at total peace. I've really forgiven you guys because I see God's hand in all of it. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, for the saving of many lives. And that line, you intend to harm me, but God intended to good, in the New Testament in Romans, it says, we know that God works together all things for the good of those who love him. I mean, this kind of idea of God's love and sovereignty and how he works in the world is kind of the theme of Genesis, how God works through broken people. It's also the theme of the Bible, and it's also the theme of your life. That God gives us lots of freedom, and unfortunately, in our freedom, we give into our sinful nature and we screw up a lot of our lives. And yet, God, in his love, continues to fulfill his purpose to bless us, to be with us, to bring us into his family, to bring the Savior into the world. And so this is just how God works. God is at work to do good even when we screw things up. So that ends Genesis. Keep reading, don't give up. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll start with Exodus soon. All right, God bless you guys.